This is what you'll be learning in today's class, and it is a basic wrap blouse which can be styled in various ways. Kindly watch, learn, and enjoy the video. Hello, guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, you're going to be learning how to cut a wrap cropped blouse. So, kindly watch if it's something you're interested in. So the first thing I've gone ahead to do is to draw my borderline, that is where I want my measurement to start from. And I've gone ahead to determine my paper by the length of the blouse. So the length of the blouse is 17 and I've cut my paper to reach that length. So if you want it longer, just add allowance to your paper. You can even do it directly on the cloth. But I'm using a crepe fabric which moves around, so I want it to stay put. That's why I'm doing it on the paper, and so that you guys can see it clearly. So the first thing I'll be going ahead to do now is to mark my neck width. So your neck width, we're going to be using 3 inches for this measurement. So depending on how big your client is, that's what determines the wideness of your neck. So the depth is going to be 1 inch for the back. Then for the front, you're going to see how I'm going to do that. So I've marked 1 inch for my back neck wideness. So I'm just going to connect this with my French curve now. So the next thing I'll be doing now is to determine my shoulder. So my shoulder, the shoulder I'll be using is 5 inches. So you can just measure your shoulder from where your neck is to determine this. Or you measure your shoulder in total and divide it by 2 to get this. So the next thing I'll be doing is to get my armhole depth, that is how deep my armhole is going to be. So to determine that, I'm going to be doing my bust measurement divided by 6 plus 1.5. So I'm going to go ahead to do that now. So I've gone ahead to measure my bust measurement divided by 6 plus 1.5, and what I got is 7.1. So I'm going to be marking 7.1 here, and I'm going to get my ruler to draw a straight line for this. So the next thing I'll be doing now is on this line, I'm going to determine how my bust measurement is going to fall on this line. On this line where I stopped. So I'm going to start my bust measurement from there. So my bust measurement divided by 4 plus 1. So depending on the allowance you want to add, that's how you, but this is a wrap blouse and you want it snug on your body. So my bust measurement divided by 4 plus 1 is 9.4. So I'm going to go ahead to mark that on this line. So I'm going to get a ruler to connect this. So the next thing I'll be doing now is to determine my waist measurement. So the next thing I'm going to do now is to measure my waist measurement divided by 4 plus 1. So I'm going to be measuring it on the where I want the blouse to reach. So that's going to be 7.5. So what I'm just going to do now is to connect this to this. So the next thing I'll do is to just get my curve and try and draw my armhole curve. So I'm just going to come out by 0 0.5 angle 45. I'm just going to come out 0 0.5 and then come in by 0 0.5 as well. So this is just to get a perfect curve, right? So that's just what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to draw the curve here. I'm going to connect it to this one. So, and that's my arm O. Yeah. So, so this is the back basically. It is basic. So, so please remember to always come down, like draw your shoulder slope. So that's the next thing I'll be doing on this measurement here. I'm going to come down by 1 and I'm going to draw this shoulder slope. This is how it looks now, right? So if you're adding if you are trying to get your armhole measurements, the depth of your armhole, it's always ideal to either add the allowance to your armhole measurement, that is your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5. Is either you add your allowance before the slope or you do this slope, that is come down by 1 inch before you get your measurement. So but this is perfect for what the client I'm sewing it for, so this is ideal. So this is basically the back, so I'm going to label it CB. I'm just going to cut this out as it is. If you want to have your dart, you can add allowance to it and create your dart, but this is just a wrapped up and it's basic. So I'm just going to go ahead now and cut this right now, and I'm going to place it on another paper to cut our front. So now I'm cutting the front. So this is our CB now. So this is our CB. So what I'm going to do now is to determine how how overlapped I want it to be on the front. So and that's what's going to determine how much allowance I put on this front. So this is the CB, but for the front, I'm going to use this for the front. So it's just the basic thing we did at the back that I'm going to be doing for the front. But at that point, just as you see it, right? At this point now, I'm just going to add how overlapped I want it to be in basic English. So what I have here right now is 5 inches. If you don't want it that overlapped, you can reduce it to like 4 inches. So if you want it more overlapped, that's 6 inches. But I'm just gonna stick with 4.5 because this is for a skinny person. So I'm just gonna go ahead and align this down. So guys, I've gone ahead to determine that I want the overlapping at the front to be like 4.5 inches, which is what I have here, right? So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to determine how deep I want my neck to be. So I'm just going to determine that here. So you should have measured it on your client, how deep they want the neck to be, or if they didn't really tell you how they want it to be, you can just make it a normal neck depth. So but depending on how deep, like how much cleavage your client wants, that's how deep you come down. So but for this, I'm just going to use like 6.5. So I'm going to mark 6.5 there. So I'm marking 6.5 there. So the next thing I'll go ahead to do right now is to get my ruler or my pattern curve, depending on the design you want. You can simply just use a straight ruler to draw this, or you can use a curve to draw this. So I've determined my length. I'm just going to use a curve to determine that. I'm just gonna put it to my neck points, right? And then draw it. So what I'm going to do now is to just lift this paper up since I'm not tracing it on the paper. So, but if I'm tracing it, you will just remove this paper totally. So this is the neck point here. I'm gonna head to mark that here. I'm just gonna continue what I'm doing. Yeah, so I'm just gonna redraw this because I held my pattern curve the other way around. So I'm just gonna redraw this here and draw it the right way. But if you don't want to go through all this stress, just use a straight ruler, right? But this just gives you that curve when you use a pattern curve. But I can still use a ruler. So I'm going to be canceling this, and this is what I'm using. This one that goes like this and comes here. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead right now and cut it. So I'm going to start the cutting from the armhole region. So remember, just in case you did the slope just after I did, before really including your client's armhole depth and all that, you can always add allowance to the shoulder area. That would help out. Yeah, but it's always good to do the shoulder slope first before you measure your armhole curve and all that. So I'm just going about cutting it right now. So it's what I have in the at the back that I'm just cutting at the front right now. The only thing different is the neckline and the overlapping area. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut the shoulder. And because I've drawn the curve here, I'm just gonna lift up this paper and start my cutting. But before I do that, I'm just gonna go ahead and mark my sewing allowance that I want my rope. How wide you want your rope to be? You determine that here. So if you're not using a rope that is too long, you mark 1 inch. But if you want it to be wide, you mark it as wide as your rope will be, and that's what will determine how where this curve will end. So remember when we're drawing the curve, let me just remove this out of the way. When we're drawing the curve, we just drew this curve to the M, that is the M of the blouse, but we didn't add the allowance. If you do it this way, it's only going to make you trim out again when you're cutting. But if you don't want to trim out again when you're sewing, just come up by how much rope you want to use, basically. So I'm just going to come up by 2 inches, yeah, and that is inclusive of sewing allowance. So by the time I sew everything, it's going to come up to like say one 1.5 1 inches. So now I'm just going to take my curve and just connect it to this new line. So please don't mind the messiness of this. But once I cut it out, you're going to see what I'm trying to explain, right? So I'm going to cut it out now. Just watch what I'm cutting so you will understand what I'm saying. And you can always go back and rewind and understand what I just said, right? So this is the CB, which I don't need anymore. I'm just going to pull it out and cut out from the neckline and cut. Just watch what I'm cutting. So I'm not going to be cutting to that point again. I'm going to cut up to the new sewing line, right? So I'm just going to cut carefully into that. Yeah. So by the time I'm sewing it, by the time I'm done sewing it, I'm just going to cut out the rope of the allowance that remains here. But if you don't do it like this, you're gonna end up trimming again from the wideness of your wideness of your overlapping. So it's better this way. So guys, well, this is the CB. I'm just gonna flip it over. So this is the CB, and this is the C center front. I'm gonna be cutting two of this, so it's gonna be overlapping each other like so. So once it overlaps, it's gonna look nice. So I'm gonna go ahead now and cut it. So guys, I've gone ahead to fold my fabric into two, and then I placed my center front on the fabric. So this is the front now. So I'm gonna go ahead now and cut out. So for the front area, if you need a little bit of allowance, you can always add that to it. So I'm just gonna be cutting it with just a little bit so that I don't have a very tiny chest when I'm sewing it. So I just need very little, and that's because I'm going to be using bias or weaving it. So it's just a very little allowance. It's not up to 0.5 inches. Can you see? So just very little, and this is just to sew it. So I'm going to be cutting this part as well. And for the length, I'm just going to add a little bit of allowance as well for the sewing as well, for the joining. So which is also very little. And that's because I'll be weaving the down parts. So I'll be weaving it before folding it. So I'm going to go ahead now and cut this side. I'm also just going to be adding very little allowance. The reason why I'm doing this is while I was cutting it, I didn't put a lot of allowances, and I don't want any shortages like the armpit area. I don't want it too tight. So the shoulder area, I'm also going to be putting a little bit of sewing allowance there. So, and that's it for the front. So I'm gonna open it up. So guys, this is how it looks like. So I'm just gonna put the paper aside. So this is how it's going to look. So this is how it's going to overlap. So we're just gonna use a bias tape to sew this. If it's not a stretchy fabric, you can just weave this part. You can just weave this part and just fold it. But this is quite stretchy, so I'm gonna be using a bias tape to sew round. So this is how it's going to look. So I'm just gonna go ahead now and cut the back as well. So this is the center back. So I'm gonna be cutting that now. So and I'm gonna just remember all the allowances I added to that one. So I'm gonna be leaving very little allowance just like I did to the down part, the side, and the shoulder area. So I'm just aligning this center front to the folded part of the fabric. I'm just gonna pin it down so that this doesn't move around while I'm trying to cut it. Yeah. So I'm just gonna go ahead now and cut it. So remember for the back I added like almost 1 inch. If you can't remember, please kindly put your fabric side by side so you remember the allowance you added. So at this point I didn't add anything. But at the side I added a little bit, so I'm gonna do that here as well. And that's it. So this is my back. Yeah, this looks pretty. It's a very beautiful print. So this is what the back looks like, and I'm gonna go ahead and weave this as well. So the next thing I'll be doing after I've done weaving it is to cut the sleeve. So to cut the sleeve, you just fold your fabric into two or into four. That is if you are cutting the pieces, the two pieces of your sleeves together. So right now, what I'm doing here is folding my fabric into two, and I'm going to go ahead and fold it again into two. Just watch what I'm going to be doing. So yeah, I folded it into two. So I'm going to go ahead and fold it again into two. So I can get my two sleeves at once. So the next thing I'll be doing here is to measure my round armhole, and then what I have there I divide it by two, and then that's what I want to mark here. So I haven't marked it before, it wasn't up to what I need, that's why I'm refolding the fabric. So I'm just refolding the fabric so I can get my armhole measurement divided by two plus 1 inch or half inch to sew. So this is me just refolding it so I can get that measurement, and mine is 16 divided by 2, that is 8 plus 0.5 or 1 inch. So I'm going to go ahead now and mark it once I'm done aligning my fabric together. So right now I've gotten the 8.5 I need. So I'm going to go ahead with the rest of the measurement here. So the next thing now I want to do now is to determine my top line, and I'm going to mark that so I can start my measurement. So this is my top line, and you can make use of a ruler here. And so I'm gonna head to rule my straight line, making use of my tape measure. Please kindly use a ruler if you have one nearby. So this is just a starting point so that I don't cut into a part of the fabric that is cut out. So I'm measuring the length of the sleeve, which is 5 inches. You can go ahead and measure your length of sleeve, how long you want your sleeve to be. So that's what I'm marking right now. So I'm marking it and I'm adding like the allowance I'm going to be using to sew it. So this is me extending the line with a ruler. just to make it look easy to cut. So now I have my sleeve length. So right now I'm just going to go ahead on that sleeve length line. I'm going to be marking my round sleeve measurement. So the round sleeve measurement divided by 2 plus the allowance you're going to be using. So in this case, I'm going to be using 1 inch. So that is my round sleeve measurement there. So I've gone ahead to mark, add 1 inch extra to it. This is for ease. So, and I'm connecting it right now to my armhole, where my armhole starts from. So it's always better to do this on paper first because this fabric is crepe and it moves around. This particular crepe moves around a lot. So while I was about to cut it, I realized that the middle part wasn't equal again. So I went ahead to refold it. So you can always do this on a paper to make your work very easy. So I'm just going to make use of the ruler and connect it to the armhole point. That is what I'm showing you right now. So this is me connecting the lines. So the next thing I'm going to go ahead to do now is to draw my armhole curve. And to determine that, I'm just going to measure what I have right now into 2. So, but before I do that, I just want to cut out the fabric so I will know my starting point to draw my curve. I don't want to imagine I have excess fabric to work with. So I'm just going to measure what I have there, divide it by 2 to get a midpoint. This is so I can go ahead and draw my armhole curve. So I'm just going to mark that midpoint there. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and draw my armhole curve, as you can see me do. So this is very easy to do, not difficult at all. So I just came down by the armhole points by 1 inch down there, and I drew the armhole to the midpoint I drew earlier on. So this is it for the sleeve. It is very easy to do. It is not difficult to achieve. So I'm just checking to be sure that I marked everything I need right now. So the next thing to do is to cut it out. So I'm going to be cutting it out right now, carefully. So at this point, if you know you've not added your allowance, kindly add it before you cut out. Once you cut it out, it's difficult to add your allowance. So this is me just measuring if my round armhole is exactly what I have there, which is exactly what I have there, plus my sewing allowance. So the next thing is to just cut it out, and then I'm going to go ahead to my blouse and attach the sleeve to the blouse. So this is the finished look of the sleeve, and I'm going to go next ahead. I'm going to go ahead next to cut my belt for the wrap blouse, after which I will go to my machine and attach the sleeves to the blouse. So what I'm about doing next is to cut my belt for the wrap blouse. So for the length of the belt, for the rope for the wrap blouse, I'm using 45 inches and I'm cutting 2 pieces of each. For the wideness, I use 2 inches since that is what I have. Since that is what I have at the belt region, I'm using 2 inches since that is what I have at the belt region. So that is 45 inches by 2 inches. 2 inches for the wideness. So when you open it up, you have 4 inches. But remember, you're going to be sewing it, so you add your sewing allowance to sew it onto the blouse. So that's going to be like 4.5 or 5 inches. So this is me opening it up. So I'm going to go ahead, once I'm done, I'm going to go ahead and join everything to my blouse, and I'll be showing you guys the finished look of this beautiful wrap blouse. So guys, this is the blouse. As you can see, this is the blouse. So I'm just showing you guys how it looks before I go ahead to add the rope and the sleeves to it. So this is how it looks so far. Yeah, I've gone ahead to add my bias. So this is how it looks. So I'm going to be adding my rope next and the sleeves, and I'm going to show you how it looks at the end. So guys, this is the end result of the wrap blouse. Look at the versatility of it. There are different ways in which you can style your wrap blouse, and look at how it's beautiful. So you can style it anyhow you want, as you can see in the video. So it's a really simple thing to learn, and you can rock it on your trousers, on your shorts, on your palazzo. So you can rock it with anything basically. It's so beautiful. Kindly thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe to my channel. Bye.